Good morning, class. So today's topic is induction of labor. Induction of labor is very important topic to you. It will be asked in essay question and lot of viva questions will be asked for you regarding the medical management of induction of labor. So Girish, excuse me. So today we are going to learn about the definition of induction of labor and augmentation of labor, the indications, contraindications, and the complications that come out of induction of labor, and how to get a successful induction and better outcome of the delivery, and what are the various techniques we adopt for the induction of labor, and how to monitor the progress of labor while the patient is on induction. So, coming to the definition, you have to clearly understand the difference between induction of labor and augmentation of labor. Induction of labor is done in a quiescent term uterus. That means the patient is not in labor. And the definition is it implies an artificial initiation of uterine contractions in a calm term uterus by any methods like medical, surgical, or combined methods with the aim to given a successful normal vaginal delivery. That is the aim of induction of labor. Coming to augmentation of the labor, augmentation means the patient is already in labor. You have to give some aid to have a successful normal vaginal delivery. That is augmentation of labor. It is a process of accelerating the labor by use of oxytocin, amniotic, or many either a medical or surgical methods of induction. So before keeping the patient on induction, you have to evaluate certain maternal factors and fetal factors for the successful outcome. The maternal factors, you have to definitely confirm the indication of induction. So for keeping an induction, the main purpose of induction is to have a successful normal vaginal delivery. What is the normal labor? Normal labor means the pregnancy must be single, the presentation must be cephalic presentation, singleton pregnancy, term uterus, and the labor has to progress with minimal aids without any complications to the mother and the fetus. So that indication must be confirmed. And any contraindications, they have to be reviewed, and you have to clinically assess the pelvis of the mother before keeping the induction. You have to assess the pelvis and see whether the pelvis is adequate for vaginal delivery, and the size of the baby also matters. And the most important factor for induction of labor is assessing the cervical score, that is called Bishop score, that I'll explain. And you have to review the risk, benefits, and alternatives for the induction of the labor with the patient. Coming to fetal factors, for successful induction, the fetus must be mature. There are some indications where we have to deliver a premature fetus, that is a different entity, and the fetus must have adequate lung maturity. Only lung maturity will come at 38 weeks, completed gestational weeks, only the fetal lung maturity will come. You have to ensure the fetal maturity before keeping the patient on induction, and the fetal weight must be adequate. For the Indian scenario, the adequate gestational age and the weight of the fetus must be around 3 kgs, and that the fetal presentation must always be cephalic, not oblique, no transverse line, no hand presentation, no shoulder presentation. Always, if you keep induction, the presentation of the fetus must be cephalic presentation. And the confirm the fetal well-being. The fetal heart rate must be ensured and it must be good. The fetal heart rate must be around 140 beats per minute to 160 beats per minute while you keep induction. Here are some WHO recommendations for the induction of labor. You have to be thorough with. Induction of the labor should be performed only when there is a medical indication. That means the benefits of induction must be more rather than the risks. And in applying the recommendations, consideration must be given to the actual conditions, wishes, and preferences of the women. The women who is going to labor must be explained about the indications, contraindications, all the complications. And if the women insist on induction, even if the other factors we have discussed that are not the criteria or not meeting, if she insists on indication, you should not encourage the induction. Only the cervical factors and the other factors we have discussed before, only all the meet criteria only, then you have to keep induction. And when you induce the patient, one obstetrician must be readily available to monitor the patient to see the risks of hyperstimulation, the uterus rupture and fetal distress. So the complications, main complications while you keep induction would be hyperstimulation, uterine rupture and fetal distress. These are the three major complications while the patient is in labor. Next, whenever the indication or induction of labor is carried out, you have to keep a backup method. The backup method for normal labor is nothing but cesarean section. So when you keep an patient ready for induction, you have to summon the OT and keep the everything ready for cesarean section. And facilities must be available to assess the maternal and fetal well-being. How to monitor the maternal conditions? We may monitor the maternal conditions by monitoring her vital data, her abdominal examination, pervaginal examination. This is we how assess the maternal condition. For the fetal well-being, we monitor the fetal heart rate with the help of fetal Doppler or the clinical stethoscope. So women receiving oxytocin, misoprostol or any other prostaglandin, they should not be neglected. A thorough examination and thorough monitoring is required if you keep the patient on induction. Induction of labor is not an OPD procedure. You have to admit the patient and carefully monitor the case. So coming to the indications, we have absolute accepted indications and relative indications. Coming to the absolute indications, first is hypertensive disorders, preeclampsia. Preeclampsia, you have to terminate the pregnancy at 38 weeks of gestation after the fetus attains the lung maturity. At 38 weeks, there is no point of continuing the pregnancy because in preeclampsia, the triggering factor is placenta. As long as the placenta is inside the mother's womb, the patient is at risk of eclampsia. So you have to terminate the pregnancy at 38 weeks of gestation. So preeclampsia stands first as an absolute indication. Next are maternal medical conditions like diabetes mellitus, renal disease, chronic pulmonary disease. And another most important is pre-labor rupture of membranes. Here you have to know the difference between pre-labor rupture of membranes and early rupture of membranes. Pre-labor rupture of membranes means the patient has lost the amniotic fluid even before she is in labor. And what is early rupture of membranes? The patient is in latent or active phase of labor and she has lost the membranes. In both the conditions also, the pregnancy has to be decided. The pregnancy outcome must be decided within 24 hours. If it is not decided, either we have to do normal delivery or cesarean section. The outcome of rupture of membrane should come within 24 hours. Otherwise, we have a risk of chorioamnitis and sepsis. So, chorioamnitis and pre-labor rupture of membranes stand as an absolute indication for induction. Coming to fetal factors, IUGR or fetal growth restriction. Fetal growth restriction means the baby is not getting any benefits by staying inside the mother's womb. So, after giving necessary corticosteroids and after checking for the lung maturity, we have to terminate the pregnancy in IUGR. And isoimmunization or RH incompatibility is one condition where you should not allow the woman to go into past lives. Because as the woman goes into past lives, there is more chances of fetal hemolysis. So this is one indication. Next is oligohydramnios. The definition, this one also speaks. Oligohydramnios, if you keep on neglecting, the baby may die in utero. So you have to induce the labor. Next is IUD. What happens if we leave IUD without inducing the labor? The mother will go into disseminated intravascular coagulation. Already the baby is lost and also we are going to lose a mother if not attended. So fetal demise or intrauterine fetal death, we have to induce the labor. Next is prolonged pregnancy more than 42 weeks. Coming to you have to know the difference between post-dated pregnancy and post-term pregnancy. Post-dated pregnancy is any pregnancy that crosses 40 weeks. So 40 weeks 1 day is post-term pregnancy. 40 weeks 3 days is a post-dated pregnancy. Next, what is post-term pregnancy? Post-term pregnancy is any pregnancy that has crossed beyond 42 weeks. That is post-term pregnancy. Both also they have to be induced. Coming to relative indications, the maternal are hypertensive disorders like chronic hypertension, maternal medical conditions like SLE or systemic lupus erythematosus, gestational diabetes, hypercoagulable disorders, cholestasis of pregnancy, and polyhydramnios. These indications have to be discussed with the partner, and the treating obstetrician can decide about the induction. And fetal anomalies requiring special neonatal care. When there is a risk of rapid labor, the obstetrician will decide whether she has to induce the labor or not. When the patient is far from hospital, you can admit the patient and induce the labor. And other psychosocial conditions, advanced cervical dilatation, all these relative indications, they depend upon the choice of obstetrician and the patient. They have to decide. And previous stillbirth and post-term pregnancy, these are relative indications. Now, in which conditions you should not induce the labor? The first and the foremost indication is post-cesarean pregnancy or uterus with the previous uterine scar for hysterectomy and patient who had undergone a classical cesarean section, or the patient has history of previous uterine rupture in previous delivery. These are absolute contraindications for induction of labor. Next, active genital herpes infection. What happens if the patient have an active genital herpes infection and if you induce a labor, we introduce the infection to the baby also with induction. So you should not keep induction in a case of active herpes. Placenta previa and vasa previa. What happens if we induce labor in placenta previa and vasa previa? The placenta will be lying under the internal. So if you do a pervaginal examination and put an induction, the patient will bleed profusely. So there is no chance of saving the baby and the mother. So this is an absolute contraindication. Placenta previa and vasa previa, no induction of labor. Only the mode of delivery is cesarean section in these conditions. Next, umbilical cord prolapse. Already the patient has progressed into the labor and the os has dilated and the cervix, up to the cervix, the umbilical cord has prolapsed. So there is no need to induce the labor. You have to terminate the pregnancy by cesarean section. Next, transverse and oblique line. The labor won't progress in transverse or oblique line. Here also the mode of delivery is cesarean section. Next, in contracted pelvis, there is no question of induction of labor. Coming to relative contraindications, cervical fibroid, severe cardiac disease, malpresentations like breech and non-reassuring fetal status like fetal distress, you have to, if there is a proper monitoring facility and backup facility, you can keep the induction and with careful monitoring, you can deliver, or if not, you can deliver the patient by cesarean section. So what are the risks associated with the induction of labor? If the induction fails, it will land up in cesarean section. That is the most common risk with induction of labor. It is more common in nulliparous women. The risk increases 2 to 3-fold in nulliparous women. The favorable the Bishop score, the high success rate is the induction. If you keep the Bishop score, is suppose the Bishop score is around 3 or 4, if you keep induction, it will definitely fail and the patient will land up in cesarean section. So you have to carefully assess before induction of labor and the outcome will be good. Next, chorioamnitis. Even if the membranes are not ruptured with the help, if the proper asepsis is not maintained during the induction of labor, the patient will land in chorioamnitis. Next, yttrian atony. This is the common complication with or without induction of labor. PPH and hemorrhage is the most common complication with patients undergoing induction or augmentation. You have to be well prepared to handle PPH. The basic thing for induction of labor is you have to make the firm, long, closed cervix into soft, dilatable and well-effaced cervix to make way for the birth of the baby. This is called cervical ripening. So what is cervical ripening? It's a prelude to the onset of labor where the cervix becomes soft and complete. The previously long closed cervix becomes thinned, effaced and starts to dilate. It occurs either naturally or a result of physical or pharmacological interventions. So what happens to the cervix if we keep induction? The cervix undergoes changes right from the patient conceives till delivery, and after delivery also the cervix undergoes changes. It is a chronic process which begins from the first trimester of pregnancy and progresses till term. Gradually the cervix softens, dilates and face the cervix. That is called Goodell's and Chadwick sign. When you see the first trimester changes, the cervix will become soft and bluish discoloration of the vagina. That is called Chadwick sign. This remodeling process is extremely complex and involves properly timed release of biochemical cascades and the interaction between the cellular and extracellular components and the infiltration with the inflammatory cells that make the cervix soft. So the main factors, what happens is here it does not destroy the cervical elements, but it causes the rearrangement of the cervical fibers. So the main inflammatory cascade is interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 6 and interleukin 8, platelet activating factor, monocyte chemotactic factors. They enhance the activity of the enzyme collagenase, which break down the collagenase and causes rearrangement of the cervical fibers. It does not destroy the collagen of the cervix. You must remember. And the hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen, what causes it? Causes myometrial contraction. What is action of progesterone? The progesterone maintains the pregnancy. It keeps a pregnancy calm. So it inhibits the collagenases, hyaluronic acid interleukins. So it is the difference between the ratio of the estrogen and the progesterone which progresses to labor. So during the labor, the estrogen quantity increases and the progesterone quantity decreases. And the other factor is nitric oxide. The nitric oxide stimulates leukocyte infiltration and induces the prostaglandin secretion. So the key factor for induction of the labor is release of prostaglandins. So pre-induction cervical score. The pre-induction cervical score is the heart for induction of labor. The scoring system is based on the properties of cervix that may be assessed clinically at the time of pelvic examination. In the Bishop score, you have 4 cervical factors and 1 fetal factor. The four cervical factors is dilatation of the cervix, effacement of the cervix, consistency of the cervix, and position of the cervix. And 1 fetal factor is the station of the fetal presenting part. Here comes the Bishop score. So Bishop score is divided into 4 parts: 0, 1, 2, and 3. Coming to dilatation, a score of 0 is given for 0 dilatation, and score of 1 for 1 to 2 centimeter dilatation, score of 2 for 3 to 4 centimeter dilatation, and 3 for dilatation more than 4 centimeters. So dilatation of 4 centimeter dilatation means the patient is in active stage of labor. Now coming to effacement, score of 0 for 0 to 30%, 1 for 40 to 50%, and 2 for 60 to 70%, and more than 80% is 8 is the patient is in active phase of labor. Coming to station, -3 is given of score of 0, and -2 score of 1, and -1 for a score of 2, and +1, 0, +1, +2, anything above 0 station is +3 score. Coming to cervical consistency, firm cervix 0 score, medium consistency score of 1, soft consistency and above is 2 and 3. And cervical position, posteriorly placed cervical os is 0 score, mid position 1, anterior position is 2, and more than anything is 3. So I will give an example for you to understand better. So the total favorable score for successful induction will be 15. And a Bishop score between 6 to 15, you have a successful induction. Any Bishop score less than 60, the induction will get failed. I'll explain now. For example, the cervix is firm, posterior, 50% 1 centimeter dilated, 0 station. Here, the cervix is soft, anterior, 80% left, 2 centimeters, 5 millimeters, which means so we'll see the Bishop score in these two conditions. In this condition, the cervix is firm. So what score it will get? The score is 0. Okay? And the cervix is posteriorly placed. The score is 0. And 50% effaced. Here the score will be 1. and 1 centimeter dilated. The score will be 1 and the station is at 0, 3. The score is 3. So the total Bishop score here will be 5. And here the induction will failed induction. Should not give induction. Now you see here. Here the cervix is soft. Score of 2. Okay. The cervical position is anterior. Anterior score is 2. Effacement of 80%. Score is 3. 2 centimeter dilatation. Score of 1. Headed 0 station plus 3. So it was 7, 8, 9, 10. The score is 11. So successful induction. So hope with this example you can understand the cervical scoring system. Are you able to see? See? The lesser the Bishop score, the induction will fail. The more the Bishop score, the successful will be the induction. The higher the Bishop score, the more ripe will be the cervix. So, any Bishop score less than 6 is unfavorable. 6 to 15 Bishop score has a successful induction score. Other factors which aim for successful induction of labor will be the period of gestation. The more term with the term uterus is more towards term gestation, the induction will be successful. The pre-induction cervical score more than 6 will lead to a successful induction. The oxytocin sensitivity to the myometrium, the more the sensitive to oxytocin, the more successful will be the induction. And presence of fetal fibronectin in the vaginal swab, if it is more than 50 nanograms per ml, the induction will be successful. If the maternal height is more than 5, then also we have a successful outcome. Suppose if the maternal height is only 5 inches and the baby weight is 3 or 4 kgs, we cannot expect a normal vaginal delivery. So, depending upon the maternal height and the fetal weight, the success of the outcome depends. And normal BMI people will have more success in after induction of labor. And the estimated fetal weight with 3 or less than 3 will have a normal vaginal delivery. Other scoring systems apart from Bishop Scora, this is only for theoretical purpose. It is field system, Burnett system of Bishop score. In Burnett system of Bishop score, instead of cervical effacement, we have a cervical length. Next is weighted Bishop score by Freeman and pelvic score by Lange. So, apart from the fetal monitoring and Bishop score, one more superior monitoring of induction of labor will be ultrasound. It has a advantage of digital examination. It is more objective and assess the entire length of the cervix. With the ultrasound, we only measure the cervical length. Any cervical length less than 2.5 centimeters will have a successful induction of labor and successful outcome, whereas cervical length of more than 2.5, we do not expect an accepted outcome with the cervical length of more than 2.5. And Bishop score predicts delivery within 24 hours and transvaginal ultrasound will predict delivery within 48 hours. But compared to ultrasound, Bishop score is more ideal. Coming to methods of induction, this is an very important topic for you. It will be asked in Viva and it is a favorite question of all examiners. We have 4 methods of induction. One is natural method, mechanical, chemical and hormonal. Natural methods are breast or nipple stimulation. What happens if we manipulate the breast or nipples? It will stimulate the release of oxytocin. And this oxytocin acts on the myometrium of the uterus to initiate the labor. Next is sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse, what will happen? It is a age-old practice. It is not done routinely, and it is also not recommended. It causes a rupture of the membranes that overlay the internal loss. And this acts as an amniotic, artificial amniotomy, which induces or augments the labor. This is also not recommended. The only two accepted natural methods of induction of labor would be membrane stripping and amniotomy. There is no role of acupressure or acupuncture. It is only for theoretical purpose. Coming to mechanical balloon catheters, laminaria tents, and synthetic osmotic dilators. These do favor only when we go for second trimester abortions. For third trimester normal deliveries, mechanical dilators have no use. Now, the most important is hormonal. Hormonal are oxytocin, prostaglandin tablets or gels, PGE2, and misoprostol, it is called PGE1. Others are relaxin, nitric oxide donors, and mifepristone. We'll discuss now. And coming to the chemical or non-hormonal are herbs, evening primrose oil, homeopathic preparations, enema, castor oil. They act as a supplement, but they do not act solely as an induction of labor agents. Coming to non-pharmacological means of cervical rapine. Most of the women during labor, they'll have sips of hot water or sips of tea. They assume that will stimulate uterine contractions. So evening primrose oil, blue and black cohosh, raspberry leaves, they are used as a non-pharmacological methods for cervical ripening. Breast stimulation, as already told, it stimulates the release of oxytocin. The one more disadvantage is if not monitored in proper conditions, we may miss the fetal heart rate abnormalities. Next is castor oil, hot baths, and enema. Even in routine practice, also we give soap water enema and to smoothen the labor progress. For the entry of the passage of the fetus, the bladder and bowel must be empty. So it is a supplement for the induction of labor, but is not the method for the induction of labor. Next, coming to mechanical methods of induction of labor, we have natural osmotic dilators and synthetic osmotic dilators. Natural osmotic dilators are laminaria tents, the Laminaria japonicum, Laminaria digitata, and isopol. And synthetic dilators are Lamisil and Dilapen. They do nothing. They just absorb the water content in and around the cervix, and they swell up. They swell up 4 to 5 times their original length and mechanically dilate the cervix. And with the dilatation of the cervix, the prostaglandins will be released. The action is around 4 to 6 hours, but they can swell up to 24 hours. And the most important side effect with this hygroscopic dilators is introduction of ascending infection that leads to chorea amnitis. Coming to balloon devices also, they are recommended for second trimester abortions, not for normal labors. The combination of balloon catheter plus oxytocin is recommended as an alternative method when prostaglandins are not available. It is an OPD procedure. It can be inserted in the presence or absence of membranes, and associate the more the bishops score, the successful will be the induction with the balloon devices. And this is one of the natural and successful method of induction of the labor. It is membrane stripping. Stripping is nothing but the loose amniotic membranes and the amniotic fluid lying over the internal os. We make clockwise rotation over the fetal head. What happens? It releases the endogenous prostaglandins and mechanically dilates the cervix. And as a result, a reflex is generated. That reflex is called Ferguson's reflex. The Ferguson's reflex, what is the Ferguson reflex? With the release of the endogenous prostaglandins at the site, it stimulates the maternal pituitary to release oxytocin, and this oxytocin acts on the maternal uterus and initiate the labor. And the advantage of membrane stripping is it is not at all expensive. It does not use any hormones or medications. So it is less expensive. It is an easy and OPD procedure. It results in less labor inductions, less post-dated pregnancy, and it also aids in more spontaneous labor. Membrane stripping is an OPD procedure. Coming to amniotomy. Amniotomy means nothing but instead of stripping the membranes, we rupture the membranes that overlay the internal os in a dilated cervix. The effectiveness depends upon the state of the cervix, station of the presenting part. Advantages is it has a high success rate, and while rupturing the membranes, we have a chance to observe the amniotic fluid for blood and meconium. And if in case if we need extensive fetal monitoring, we can use fetal scalp electrode or intrauterine pressure catheter for fetal blood sampling. And amniotomy is a strictly inpatient procedure. It cannot be employed. Amniotomy cannot be done in a closed cervix unless the cervix must be one finger dilated to perform the procedure. So which conditions we do amniotomy is abruptio placenta or antepartum hemorrhage, hydramnios, preeclampsia, eclampsia. What happens we artificially rupture the membranes in these conditions? The intra-abdominal pressure will be released. So the patient will sense a sense of relief after the intra-abdominal pressure is released. The uterine sensitivity of the oxytocin increases and the labor progresses smoothly. So amniotomy is also not recommended if the baby died inside the uterus, if the patient has maternal AIDS or active genital herpes infections. And one more condition, in preterm or premature fetus, you should not do amniotomy. It's an absolute contraindication. So, as previously discussed, the immediate benefits of ARM or amniotomy is it lowers the blood pressure in preeclampsia and eclampsia, relief of maternal distress in hydramnios, control of bleeding in antepartum hemorrhage, not placenta previa, abruptio placenta only, and relief of tension in abruptio placenta, and it initiates the labor. So there are some hazards while doing ARM. Most important is if the head is not properly engaged. Suppose if the station of the head is at zero station and you perform amniotomy, instead of the fetal head coming downwards, the umbilical cord will prolapse. So for the ideal procedure to do the amniotomy is the head must be fixed and it must cross the pelvic brim and that made at zero station. Then only you have to do amniotomy. Suppose if the head is floating and you want to relieve the maternal distress in case of polyhydramnion, you have to just push the maternal abdomen and fix the fetal head parabdominally and then do a controlled ARM. And the hazards are, as already told, umbilical cord prolapse, amniotomy, accidental injury to the placenta, cervix, uterus, fetal parts, and vasa previa. And the most important and dreadful complication is Lichen-Amni embolism. These can be avoided if we do a controlled ARM or low rupture of membranes, not high rupture of membranes. Coming to pharmacological techniques, we have the two important and most widely used pharmacological methods. One is PGE1 misoprostol, PGE2 dinoprostol, other is oxytocin. These three are most commonly used. Compared to dinoprostol, PGE1 tablets are most widely used. Others are estrogen, relaxin, hyaluronic acid, and progesterone receptor antagonist. The basis of the prostaglandins is it releases a chemical called arachidonic acid. This arachidonic acid stimulates the endogenous prostaglandins to release. The main prostaglandins are PGE2, PGE1, PGI2, PGF2 alpha. This PGE1, E2, PGI2, they cause vasodilatation and myometrial contraction, where PGF2 alpha, apart from myometrial contraction, it also causes vasoconstriction. PGF2 role is mostly after delivering the uterus, it helps in the retraction of the uterus. So the main prostaglandins released with the help of these prostaglandin analogs are PGE2, PGE1, PGI2, and PGF2 alpha. These acts in the myometrium, deciduum, and fetal membranes during pregnancy. And these in turn causes the swelling of the extracellular matrix of the cervix and dilates the cervix and ripen the cervix. The preparations are PGE2 dinoprostol, PGE1 misoprostol. You have to remember the names thoroughly. PGE2 dinoprostol and PGE1 misoprostol. Don't tell PGE1 for dinoprostol and PGE2 for misoprostol. You may lose your marks. So PGE2 is available in the form of vaginal gel, tampons, and pessaries. Vaginal gel preparations are Prepradil and Cerviprime. Cerviprime is the most commonly used in our practice, and reversible tampon is Cervidil. Vaginal pessary is Prostin E2. PGE1 is misoprostol tablets or Cytotec or Zytotec. These are the commercial names for these tablets. Coming to prostaglandin E2 or dinoprostol, the Cerviprime gel, it only action is up to the level of cervix, not on the uterine myometrium or on the uterine forms. These prostaglandins mainly act on the cervix level only. It is available in the form of 2.5 ml syringe. It is used for intracervical application. So these prostaglandin procedures or oxytocin procedures, whenever you use, you have to admit the patient, and it is strictly an inpatient procedure, not an outpatient procedure. With the woman in supine, the tip of the pre-filled syringe is placed intracervically and the gel is deposited just below the internal cervical os. And the patient has to remain on the bed for 30 minutes. So maximum the doses are to be only 3 doses, and 3 doses of Cerviprime has to be repeated in interval of 6 hours for 24 hours. Once the cervix dilated, you have to stop the use of dinoprostin and later augment the process of labor with oxytocin. This I already discussed. And now dinoprostin, as I already told, it has to be administered only at hospital. While keeping induction, you have to carefully monitor the uterine activity and the fetal heart activity. And after you achieve a maximal response with 3 doses, a further augmentation should be initiated only 6 to 12 hours after the last dose of the dinoprostin. Because if we keep on stimulating with the help of dinoprostin, oxytocin without proper interval, there is a risk of uterine rupture and uterine hyperstimulation. So the most important side effect with the help with the if we use prostaglandins is uterine hyperstimulation. And before knowing what is hyperstimulation, you must know what is a good uterine contraction. Good uterine contraction is frequency with 2 to 3 contractions in 10 minutes, with each contraction lasting only 45 seconds. But in hyperstimulation, you have, instead of 2 to 3 contractions, you have 5 contractions in 10 minutes, and each contraction, instead of 45 seconds, each contraction lasts 2 minutes. That is a very dangerous sign. You may lose the baby due to fetal hypoxia. It is the most severe complication with PGE2 or dinoprostin gel. And if you suspect any hyperstimulation, immediately you have to reverse the procedure or withdraw all the gel that is present in the vagina, give IV terbutaline, and you have to closely monitor the fetal heart rate. If the fetal heart rate is not revived, you have to quickly shift the patient to cesarean section. The side effects with dinoprostin are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. This is common with any of the prostaglandin. And the most important side effect is glaucoma, hepatic renal and renal disease, and it precipitates asthma in asthmatic individuals. Misoprostol, this is a favorite for all the obstetrician and gynecologists. That maximum, it is available in the form of a tablet of 200 micrograms. To make it is 25 micrograms, you have to divide the tablet into 4 parts. To give a tablet of 50 microgram dosage, you have to divide the tablet into 2 parts. And it is very cheap and it is easy to store. Sorry, for 50 micrograms, you have to divide into 4 parts, and for 25, you have to divide into 8 parts. So misoprostol, the route of administration can be either vaginal, oral or sublingual, and the most favorite route adopted by gynecologists in the outside practice is vaginal. Oral and sublingual routes are rapidly acting and we cannot reverse the actions of the prostaglandins. Suppose if the patient had landed into hyperstimulation, we can easily remove the vaginal tablet. That is not possible with the oral and sublingual route. So it is vaginal route is the most preferred route for the induction of labor with misoprostol tablet. It is extensively absorbed from GIT. So the side effects will be more nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, everything will be more with misoprostol. And the half-life is 20 to 40 minutes. Compared to oxytocin, it is on the half-life of oxytocin is only 3 to 4 minutes. So any changes of hyperstimulation, or if you suspect any fetal distress, you can easily reverse it by stopping the oxytocin rate. That is not possible with misoprostol. So you have to carefully monitor the indications. You have to check the contraindications. Everything you have to keep ready for cesarean section. Then only you have to keep prostaglandin induction. So for dinoprost, maximum 3 doses with an interval of 6 hours between each dose. And for Zytotec, 4 to 6 hours gap with each 25 microgram tablet with maximum of 6 doses. Okay, clearly understood. 25 microgram tablet to be repeated every 4th hourly, maximum 6 doses. But here in gynecological practice or routine practice, for the primigravida, we keep an induction with 50 micrograms repeating every 4 to 6 hours for 3 doses, or 25 microgram tablet 4 to 6 hours for 6 doses. So most important, apart from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, the important side effect is meconium passage. Meconium passage and uterine rupture is the most important side effect with Zytotec tablets. Coming to oxytocin, it is the most important in clog. It is a nonapeptide synthesized in the supraoptic and paraventricular nucleus of hypothalamus. Compared to oxytocin, this prostaglandin, the half-life of oxytocin is only 3 to 4 minutes, and the storage of oxytocin is also important. It has to be kept refrigerated. Unlike prostaglandin, in the tablet form, it can be kept at room temperature. It is rapidly metabolized and degraded by the enzyme oxytocin. The main action of oxytocin is the release of intracellular calcium by blocking the cyclic AMP and initiate the myometrial contraction. That is the main action of oxytocin. The prostaglandins, they act on the cervix, whereas the oxytocin acts on the uterine fundus. So the initiation of the contraction starts from the uterine fundus from both the halves from the tubal ostia, then proceeds towards the cervix. So the action of oxytocin is streamlined, unlike this prostaglandins. The dangers of oxytocin are: first is uterine hyperstimulation, next is uterine rupture, water intoxication, because apart from this oxytocin property, it has antidiuretic property or water retention. So sodium levels has to be monitored if you suspect any water intoxication, hypotension, and fetal distress or fetal hypoxia with hyperstimulation of the uterus. So we have two dose regimens for oxytocin. One is low dose regime and other is the high dose regime. In low dose regime, we will start with as low dose of 2 milli international units per minute, increasing at a rate of 30 minutes with 2 milli international units per minute. Next is high dose, that is we have to start with 6 milli international units, increment the dose at the rate of 6 milli units every 15 minutes. In both the cases, the outcome is good. So, coming to low dose protocol, the initial dose is 1 to 2 milli international units per minute. It has to be increased every 30 minutes. The maximum dose is 8 to 12. And suppose if the labor is not progressing up, even if you increase the dose to 12 milli international units, you have to reassess the patient. Then increase the maximum dose is only 30 milli international units. After that, you have to stop the procedure of oxytocin induction. Then take the patient for cesarean section. Same as this with high dose protocol, but the dose is, instead of 30 minutes, you have to accelerate the dose every 15 minutes. So you have kept the induction, you have used all the drugs. Then how to monitor the mother and the baby? We have two. One is the maternal auscultation with the fetal with the with the fetal Doppler. You can see maternal vital monitors, periabdominal examination, pervaginal examination. You can monitor, but that is not possible if the patient is staying in labor for 24 hours. You cannot stay all the 24 hours for the patient to deliver. Instead, a simple partogram is there. It is a composite graphical record of key data during labor entered in a single sheet of paper. And if you're, suppose your shift is for 6 hours, you plot the graph for your 6 hours and hand over to the next duty person. The advantages of partogram is early detection and abnormal progress of labor can be detected. It prevents a prolonged labor. It increases the quality and regularity of all the observations of mother and fetus, and it early recognizes the maternal and fetal problems, and it provides the basis of decision making. And you can refer the patient with the partogram if you cannot handle the things alone. And the thing is, whatever you're doing, you're documenting on the paper. So will be medical legally safe if you plot a partogram during labor. So for your understanding, this is the partogram. It has 8 components. The first column, as you can see, it has the name of the patient, the gravida. Suppose the patient is second gravida, gravida 2. The patient has already one live birth, para 1, the hospital number, the date and time of admission. If the patient is admitted with rupture of membranes, you have to write down since how many hours the patient is leaking. That is the first column. Next, second column is fetal heart rate. So fetal heart rate, the range is 100 to 180 beats per minute. That is normal is 160. So in the latent phase of labor, we monitor the fetal heart rate every 30 minutes, whereas in the active phase, every 15 minutes. In the during the time of delivery and full dilatation, every 5 minutes you have to plot the graph like this. Then next is the third column will be the Leica. What is Leica? Amniotic fluid. So the first column will be the patient details, second column will be the fetal heart rate, and the third column will be the amniotic fluid monitoring. If the patient is not leaking, no need to mention the amniotic fluid color. Suppose if the patient is, if the membranes, suppose the patient is not leaking, you can write in the amniotic fluid column I. If the patient is leaking and the membranes are, the fluid coming out of the membranes is clear, you mention it with C. Suppose if the amniotic fluid is green in color, you have to write M and see the difference. Suppose at 6 o'clock the patient got admitted. At the time the patient is leaking and the meconium, there is no meconium, and the amniotic fluid is color is C. At 6 o'clock you'll write C. And at 8 o'clock it has the leak of the membrane leak has turned out to meconium state like that. 8 o'clock. So from clear meconium to clear liquid to the meconium liquid, the time lapse is 2 hours. So in this way you can document the case. And if the fluid is blood stain, you mark it with the B. So meconium stain, blood stain fluid, no need to continue the process of normal labor. Immediately shift the patient for cesarean section. Now coming to molding. Molding is a state of reduction or loss of space between the skull bones. Presence or increase of molding. Molding is a normal process, not a pathological process. So degree of molding is also be repeated. So we do a pervaginal examination every 4 hours. And while doing the peroral examination, you have to record the molding. So zero molding means the bones are just separated and sutures can be easily filled. That means you can easily dip your fingers between the sutures. And stage 1 molding, the sutures are opposed. Stage 2 overlapped but reducible. And stage 3 is overlapped and not reducible. At this stage 3 of molding only you have to intervene. Stage 0, 1, 2 you can leave the labor to progress smoothly. Next, this is the most important column you have to see. Here, we have on y-axis the cervical dilatation and descent of the head. Both are in y-axis. The cervical dilatation, suppose this is a WHO modified photogram. So, you have to start plotting this column only when the patient enters the active phase of the labor. Active phase of labor is at 4 centimeters of dilatation. So, at 4 centimeters of dilatation, you have to write X. And this is the time. So the time, suppose after 1 hour, the patient is 5 centimeters dilated. So here will be 4, 5. Again, after 1 hour, the patient is 6 centimeter dilated. That is, in that way, the graph is plotted. So the graph that you plot should be on the left of the alert line. So this part is called zone 1. This is the middle, the portion between alert and the action line is zone 2, and above anything beyond action line is zone 3. Zone 2, zone 3 are danger zones. Okay, only the zone 1 is the safe zone where you can allow the labor to progress, and zone 2 and zone 3 you have to terminate the process of labor augmentation or any induction. Then you have to take up the patient for cesarean section. If not possible, refer the patient. Anything you have to document in the partogram only. So the descent of the head, suppose at 4 centimeters dilatation the head is at 0 station, and at 5 centimeters dilatation it is at +1, and 6 centimeters +2, 7 centimeters +2. So it should be like, it should gradually go down. Suppose at 4 centimeters it at 0 station, 5 centimeters also 0 station, 6 centimeters also 0 station. That means there is an arrest of the fetal head. So at that place also you have to intervene and stop the labor progress. Only if the labor progresses falls in zone 1 only you have to plot the plot it, and if anything that goes in between action or alert line you have to immediately plot it and then refer or intervene with the process. Action means you have to take action and terminate the pregnancy in either by cesarean section or any other methods, and the outcome of the pregnancy has to be plot after, suppose the patient has delivered normally, the single live fetus with the female child or male child with birth weight of 2.5 kg, everything has been recorded in this side. Now, the fourth column will be the uterine contractions. The uterine contractions, if the contractions last less than 20 seconds, you just give some light dotting. If the uterine contraction lasts more than 20 to 40 seconds, you draw oblique lines. Suppose each contraction is very strong and it lasts more than 40 seconds, you completely fill the block dark. That is the uterine contraction column. Suppose two contractions are there here in the first hour. So mild contractions only, each lasting only 10 seconds. You just give two contractions with two small dots. And after 2 to 3 hours, you have three mild contractions that last only 30 seconds. Then only oblique lines only we can plot like this. Suppose after 2 hours, you have a strong contraction of three contractions with very strong contractions of 45 seconds. So that should be completely filled dark. The next column is oxytocin drip. How many oxytocin dose? Normally we start with a high dose regime, 4 to 6 milli international units, and we start with 8 drops per minute. That you have to plot here. Then after 30 minutes, you generally increase the dose to around again 4 to 6 units. Drops is also 10 drops. Like that, you have to slowly titrate the dose. The maximum titration dose will be 30 milli international units per minute. Beyond that, you should not plot. And if that means at the 30 minutes also the labor is not progressing, you have to intervene. Suppose while the process of delivery, if the patient has fever and you have given any antibiotic or paracetamol injection, you have to give the injection details also in this box. Drug and any other intra-fluid information is given here. The last but not least column, you have maternal condition record. The maternal pulse has to be recorded every 30 minutes with the help of a dot. Suppose the maternal pulse is 90, you have to dot. And again another 1 hour, 30 minutes, another dot. And the blood pressure, you have to, suppose if the maternal blood pressure is 120 by 80, 120 by 80, like this, 120 by 80. Another 4 hours, 120 by 80, like that you have to write. And temperature, we have another column for temperature below that, and you have to write the temperature normal or any 98.4 Fahrenheit, like that you have to write. The last column, this urine analysis, if the patient shows any signs of distress, and you have to measure her urine protein, acetone, and the urine volume also, that also you have to mention in the last column. So partogram will be a viva question for you, so you have to thoroughly prepare. And partogram, you can download it from YouTube. You can watch the YouTube videos also. So the first column will be maternal information. Next is fetal heart rate monitoring, the character of the liquor, the molding. And the fourth column will be labor progress, dilatation, descent, and uterine contraction. So for the normal smooth progress, the graph has to fall to the left of the alert line. And the next column is uterine contraction column. The patient is having all strong contractions, so it is plotted dark throughout. Next, any medications, any oxytocins or any painkillers, temperature, any antibiotics you give, you have to mention, and the time of injection dose also has to be mentioned here. Next, the maternal vital data monitoring and urine color, acetone bodies, and any protein leakage. Anything has to be monitored. Suppose if the urine albumin is +1, you have to mention +1 and you have to note the time also. This is how we plot a partogram. And the outcome of the pregnancy, see here the outcome of the pregnancy is also mentioned. And another one is cardiotocography. This is another topic that will be covered by Dr. Rajeshri. It is another topic, the cardiotocogram, either the partogram or maternal monitoring or cardiotocogram. With these three methods, we can monitor the progress of the labor. So, to finish the topic, first what we have learned is the difference between induction and augmentation of labor. Induction is initiation of uterine contractions. Augmentation means that is progressing the already acting uterus. And next, prerequisites. The what are the maternal prerequisites? The maternal pregnancy, the maternal height should be adequate. The maternal the present coming to the fetal conditions, the term fetus, the pulmonary maturity must be attained. All the indications, maternal contraindications, anything we have discussed, and the modes of induction and the monitoring methods is also discussed here. If any doubts, you can ask me. So I was asked to give the syllabus for the internal examination that is being conducted on 30th of May. I will write down on the blackboard and you make a note of the syllabus. These are the topics for your internal exam. Be prepared and all the best. Thank you.